Assalamualaikum. My groupmate and I will be presenting the topics Karl Marx Theory of History. We are from Group 1.
Hi guys, my name is Hugh Yishan. My matrix number is 2x6816. So I would like to present the introduction of this topic. The early socialist critics of classical economics preached dramatic reform. It is because their objection to capitalism and its alleged evil was moral. For example, utopian socialists did not think that violent revolution should be used to change the capitalist system. They did not believe that any form of class struggle or social revolution is necessary for socialism to emerge. Instead, they used moderate way to persuade the capitalists to combat poverty and equalize the gap between rich and poor. In other words, utopian socialists wish to modify classical liberalism, not overturn the systems that supported it. Karl Marx, who is the leader of Marxian socialism, dismissed that approach.
Assalamualaikum and good morning. My name is Muhammad Chan bin Yusuf. My matric number is 2777328. So the next one is Marx shared that the early socialist moral outrage against contemporary capitalism. Their sharp criticism of classical political economy and their socialist vision of future society. However, he believed that socialism would not be forthcoming until the condition of the working class deteriorated to the point of open rebellion. He also believed that capitalism has internal contradiction that would ensure its eventual demise. Marx articulated a comprehensive critique of capitalism as well as a dialectical process by which capitalism will be overthrown. This is on theory of history and law of motion. Karl Marx also believed that social revolution was unavoidable within advanced capitalist country. He and his comrade Friedrich Engels advocate that the worker of the world unite to hasten this event. Marx's theory of history provides a framework for analyzing human society and the law of its development. In developing his theory of history, Marx was influenced by first David Ricardo, which is from classical school, early or moderate socialists, which is, for example, Christian socialism and utopian socialism and etc. The next one is Darwin, which is theory of evolution and natural selection, Hegel dialectical process, and Feuerbach philosophical materialism. The objective of this assignment is to discuss about Marx's biographical details, the intellectual influence on his writing, Karl Marx's theory of history, which is relation of production versus force of production, and 6 stages of society development in Karl Marx's theory of history.
My name is Nurul Awatif binti Umar, matric number 284571. I will be presenting Karl Marx biographical details. Who was Karl Marx? Karl Marx was a philosopher, author, social theorist, and economist. He is famous for his theories about capitalism, socialism, and communism. Born in Prussia and the son of a successful Jewish lawyer, studied law, history, and philosophy at the University of Bonn, Berlin, and Jena. Received his PhD from University of Jena at 23 years old. University positions were close to Marx because of his radicalism. After living in Prussia, Marx lived in France for some time, and that is where he met his lifelong friend, which is Friedrich Engels. And together, they wrote the books named Manifesto of the Communist Party, 1848, the Communist Manifesto summarized Marx and Engels' theories about the nature of society and politics, and is an attempt to explain the goals of Marxism and later socialism. When writing the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels explained how they thought capitalism was unsustainable and how the capitalist society that existed at the time of the writing would eventually be replaced by a socialist one. He was expelled from France and then lived for a brief period in Belgium. He then turned into journalism, was exiled from Germany, and went to Paris, where he studied French socialism and English political economy. Exiled to London in 1849 and spent remainder of his life there. We will move to the next slide. Karl Marx, tormented by illness, extreme poverty, and the death of 3 of his children in infancy, Marx continued to study, write, and organize. He wrote many articles in the New York Tribune, whose payments helped him to subsist. In 1867, he published the first volume of his magnum, which is Capital. In English, Capital, which is stand for a critic of political economy, was a full and comprehensive 3-volume critique of capitalism. He died on 14 March 1883 and was buried at Highgate Cemetery in London. After Marx's death, Engels edited his manuscript and published Volume 2 and 3 of his work. After Engels died, the remaining manuscripts were left to the leading Marxists of the time, Karl Kautsky, who published another 3 volumes of Marx writing under the title of Theories of Surplus Value. There are 3 influences. Firstly is Charles Darwin, Theory of Evolution and Natural Selection, and then George Hegel, Dialectical Process, and last one is Ludwig Feuerbach with Philosophical Materialism. We will be discuss the first intellectual influences, which is Charles Robert Darwin. Charles Robert Darwin was born in February in England. He was born into a wealthy family as the 5th of 6 children. His father, a doctor, had high hopes that his son would earn a medical degree at Edinburgh University in Scotland, where he enrolled at the age of 16. It turned out that Darwin was more interested in natural history than medicine. It was said that the sight of blood made him sick to his stomach. While he continued his studies in theology at Cambridge, it was his focus on natural history that became his passion. In 1831, Darwin embarked on voyage aboard a ship of the British Royal Navy, the HMS Beagle. Employed as a naturalist, Charles Darwin died in 1882 at the age of 73. He is buried in Westminster in London, England. In 1859, Darwin published his thought about evolution and natural selection in On the Origin of Species. It was popular as it was controversial. The book convinced many people that species change over time, a lot of time, and suggesting that the planet was much older than what was commonly believed at the time, 6,000 years. In the struggle for existence, favorable variations tend to be preserved and unfavorable ones destroyed. Species survive through a process called natural selection. Species that successfully adapted to meet the changing requirement of their natural habitat thrive, while those that fail to evolve and reproduce become extinct. Natural selection causes populations to become adapted or increasingly well suited to their environments over time. The result of natural selection was evolution of species.
Next, Darwin observed and collected evidence to support his idea about how life changes over time. The world's animal and plant communities are dynamic, not static. They change over time with new forms originating and others become extinct. Evolution is gradual. Changes arise through slow and steady environmental changes. Sudden changes challenge a species' ability to adapt. All organisms descended from an original and common ancestor. Over time, the process of natural selection has created different species, each specifically adapted to each ecological niche. Okay, this slide shows an example for Darwin theory of evolution and natural selection. First picture shows a population of mice has moved into a new area where the rocks are very dark. Due to the natural genetic variation, some mice are black while others were tan. Some mice were eaten by birds because of tan mice are more visible to predatory birds than black mice. Thus, tan mice are eaten at higher frequency than black mice. Only the surviving mice reach reproductive age and live offspring. Because black mice has higher chance of living offspring than tan mice, the next generation contains a higher fraction of black mice than the previous generation. Second intellectual influence is George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. He born on August 27, 1770 at Stuttgart, Germany. He started his study at Stuttgart Grammar School when he was 7 until 18 years old. He continued his studies in theology at Tübingen University. In 1793, he became a professor at University of Heidelberg. He also became a professor of philosophy at University of Berlin from 1818 until of his end of life. Hegel is known by his theory of dialectical process. So, what is a dialectical process? Dialectical process consists of three main agenda, which are thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. Thesis is an original statement of an idea, while antithesis is an argument to challenge the previous thesis. This is often drawn on a new data. Meanwhile, synthesis is a new argument from existing sources, typically resolve the apparent contradiction between a thesis and antithesis. This is a three-step process in which an original idea, which is the thesis, is opposed by a contradictory idea, which is antithesis, and the interaction between them produce a new idea or synthesis, which then become the new thesis. So this is the dialectical process by Hegel. So the third intellectual influencer is Ludwig Andreas von Feuerbach. Ludwig Feuerbach was born on 28 July 1804 at Landshut, Germany. He is a German philosopher and anthropologist. He abandoned theological studies to become a student of philosophy under George Hegel for 2 years at Berlin. He received his doctorate at the University of Erlangen in 1828. His famous book, which is The Essence of Christianity, provided a critique on Christianity and strongly influenced generation of later thinkers, including Karl Marx.
Assalamualaikum, my name is Siti Raulatul Jannah. I will be presenting the Feuerbach philosophical materialism. So, a focus on matter, real things or the world of reality as opposed to the realm of ideas is what we mean when we talk about materialism. So, it was in his work, Essence of Christianity, that Feuerbach made the distinction between fact and fiction. Feuerbach contended that God is an invention of humans and that human characteristics are mistakenly attributed to the divine. So people invent unreal deities or gods and worship them as if they were superhumans or divine, while in fact they are only the product of human fantasy. Feuerbach believed that history was chronicling of humanity's gradual assimilation or empirical knowledge gained through the uses of senses. Feuerbach argues that if you want people to be really happy, you have to get rid of religions like his that give them false hope. Next, we'll be moving on to the next slide, which is the influence of Darwin, Hegel, and Feuerbach on Karl Marx's idea on developing his theory of history. So, Marx's theory of political economy has parallels with Darwin's evolutionary and natural selection theories. Marx argued that the economic structure we see today are the product of evolutionary process, not a random chance. As a result of Darwin's impact, Marx came to believe even more strongly that a dynamic explanation of society was a superior than a static one. Marx also agreed with Hegel's theory of a dialectical process inside history in which a central thought, the thesis, is challenged by an opposing idea, the antithesis, and the two ideas' interaction yields a third idea, which is the synthesis, which subsequently replaced the original idea, the thesis. For instance, the conflict between the old and new concept is what gave rise to the sixth phase of Karl Marx, the theory of history, primitive communism, slavery, feudalism, capitalism, socialism, and also communism. Yet Marx abandoned Hegelian idealism for a kind of Ludwig Feuerbach philosophical materialism. He agreed with Feuerbach that the history is the tale of humanity's gradual acceptance of the truth as revealed by its senses. Marx also thought the only way to achieve true pleasure was to do away with the forms of imagination, like religion. Marx said that religion was the opium of the people in 1844. If people want to be really happy, they need to get rid of religion, which is providing them with a false sense of fulfillment. Okay, next I will be discussing about the theory of history, FOP versus ROP. So Marx developed his theory of history by fusing Darwin's theory of evolution and natural selection with Hegel's dialectical process and Feuerbach materialism. According to Marx, The forces of production (FOP) create a system of sustaining relations of production at the beginning of each historical era. But FOP and ROP are incompatible. Unlike ROP are dynamic and continually evolving. According to Marx, history is a process in which two opposing ideas eventually come to conflict with the one another. Dispute shake things up, allowing for more advanced growth in FOP through fresh ROP. The class conflict is the driving force behind the collapse of established societies. So, the superstructure helps strengthen the static ROP. When we talk about society superstructure, we're referring to its social, institution, political framework, and administrative machinery. According to Marx, the interests of the ruling class are reflected in the superstructure. The superstructure provides an explanation for the functioning of the base of FOP and ROP and protects the authority of the elite. The whole superstructure serves to preserve the status quo. So, the relations of production includes rules, social relations among people, property relation, while superstructure includes art, philosophy, religion, literature, music, and also political thought. Last but not least, I will be discussing the 6 stages of society development. The first one will be primitive communism. Men perform the same economic function. Hunter-gathering, they work together in order to survive. There was no private property and there were no classes. Eventually, the most successful hunter-gatherer gained power and control over the others. The second stage is slavery. Slave society is considered by historical materialists to be the first-class society form of citizen and slaves. The second stage will be feudalism. Land was owned by the aristocracy who exploited the peasantry who worked it. There was a surplus of food which this aristocracy sold to others, creating a class of merchants and capitalists who wanted to share political power. The fourth stage is capitalism. The wealthy of merchants and factory owners obtained political power and exploited the workers. As the proletariat become politically aware, they would rise up and overthrow the government. The fifth stage is socialism. There would be a dictatorship of the proletariat as workers. Organization redistributed food, goods and services fairly according to needs, and profits were shared by all. The middle class people would to understand that equality was superior to private ownership. The last stage is communism. Everyone would join together for the common good. Money and government would no longer be needed, and society would be classless. As all countries reach this stage, the world would become stateless, and competition and wars would cease. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, now I will discuss about the theory of history, 6 stages of society development. So for now, I will discuss about primitive communism. So primitive communism is there were no antagonistic classes, no exploitation, and no class struggle. People held land in common ownership and jointly cooperate to wrest major living the nature. So the efficiency of the production was very low, and those workers could not consistently produce surplus beyond the subsistence needed by themselves and their dependents. So they work together in order to survive. For example, of the primitive communism, we can see that the society of the Native Americans before arrival of European. So you can see the picture in Google. Okay, we move the stage 2. It is slavery. We considered as a beginning of the class society where private property appears. So the efficiency of the production rose to the level where workers could produce more than their own subsistence. Slavery became profitable and exploitation and the class conflict rise. So agricultural sector become better. People can learn to cultivate plants and rear animal on large enough scale to support large population. So citizen owns more than personal property. Land ownership become especially important during a time of agricultural development. Then we also can see that slavery permit a higher development of the production force of society, but eventually it become a barrier to the further progress. Slaves were not most highly motivate workers because the rebellions shook society and tore this stage apart. From Marxist perspective, slave society collapsed when it exalted itself. So that's all for stage 2. We move to stage 3. Okay, for the stage 3, we can see that feudalism. So during the feudalism, there are many classes such as king, lords, serf, and some little more a slave. So that the state is ruled by monarchs by inherit their position of true marry or conquer their ways into the leadership. So Marx stated the feudalism stage is unique because the exploitation of the serf is most clearly visible. We can see also in the feudal system, serfs were allowed to work a few days per week on the land assigned to them, but were forced to work in the other days on the lord's land. Feudalism brought a higher development of society force of production. The system finally limits further progress, and it was overthrown and superseded by capitalism. So that's all from me. We move to the next presenter.
Hello guys, I will continue to present the stage 3, which is feudalism. In the feudal system, serfs were allowed to work a few days per week on the land assigned to them, but were forced to work the other days on the lord's land. Feudalism brought a higher development of society's forces of production. And also, the system finally limited further progress and it was overthrown and superseded by capitalism. Now we move to stage 4, which is capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system based on the private ownership of the means of production and their operation for profit. Central characteristics of capitalism include capital accumulation, competitive markets, price systems, private property, property rights recognition, voluntary exchange, and wage labor. In a market economy, decision-making and investments are determined by owners of wealth, property, or ability of maneuver, capital, or production ability in capital and financial markets, whereas price and the distribution of goods and services are mainly determined by competition in goods and services markets. In stage 4, capitalism replaced feudalism. Although Marx hated capitalism, he paid tribute to the great increase in productivity and production. Under capitalism, there are two main groups, which is proletariats, working class, and capitalists who own the means of production such as factories. What is the proletariats? The The proletariat is the social class of wage earners, those members of a society whose only possession of significant value is their labor power, their capacity to work. A member of such a class is a proletariat. Marxist philosophy considers the proletariat to be exploited under capitalism, forced to accept meager wages in return for operating the means of production which belong to the class of business owners, the bourgeoisie. Marx argued that the oppression gives the proletariat common economic and political interests that transcend national boundaries, impelling them to unite and take over power from the capitalist class, and eventually to create a communist society free from class distinctions. Workers are allowed fully dependent upon wages. Capitalists are dependent upon money invested to create more money. Capitalists will pay the worker as little as possible, in fact just enough to keep them alive and productive. The techniques of production become increasingly concentrated and centralized. The system of private ownership of capital becomes a barrier to further progress. In this stage, unemployment increase caused the worker to revolt. Working class success to overthrow the capitalism and establish its own dictatorship of worker, which is socialism. Now we move to stage 5, which is socialism. What is socialism? Socialism is a political philosophy of movement encompassing a wide range of economic and social systems which are categorized by social ownership of means of production as opposed to private ownership. As a term, it describes the economic, political, and social theories and movements associated with the implementation of such systems. Social ownership can be public, community, collective, cooperative, or employee. While no single definition encapsulates the many types of socialism, social ownership is the one common element and is considered left-wing. Different types of socialism vary based on the role of markets and planning in resource allocation, on the structure of management in organizations, and from below or from above approaches, with some socialists favoring a party, state, or technocratic-driven approach. Socialists disagree on whether government, particularly existing government, is the correct vehicle for change. Socialism is the stage between capitalism and communism. The socialist systems are divided into non- and market forms. Non-market socialism substitutes factor markets and often money with integrated economic planning and engineering, or technical criteria based on calculation performed in kind, thereby producing a different economic mechanism that functions according to different economic laws and dynamics than those of capitalism. A non-market socialist system seeks to eliminate that perceived inefficiencies, irrationalities, unpredictability, and crisis that socialists traditionally associated with capital accumulation and the profit system in capitalism. By contrast, market socialism retains the use of monetary prices, factor markets, and in some cases the profit motive, with respect to the operation of socially owned enterprises and the allocation of capital goods between them. Profits generated by these firms would be controlled directly by the workforce of each firm for accrue to society at large in the form of a social dividend. Anarchism and libertarian socialism oppose the use of the state as a means to establish socialism, favoring decentralization above all, whether to establish non-market socialism or market socialism. According to Marx, capitalism faces class struggle and contradictions that inevitably would lead to its being overthrown and replaced by socialism. Theory of history and law of motion. The working class, in overthrowing the bourgeois state, will establish its own dictatorship of the proletariat to destroy the bourgeois class. Under socialism, profit motive and free market were eliminated as a major guiding forces for the economy. Socialism is from each according to their ability to each according to their work. Now we move to stage 6, which is communism. Communism is a left-wing to far-left social-political, philosophical, and economic ideology within the socialist movement, whose goal is the establishment of a communist society, a socio-economic order centered around common ownership of the means of production, distribution, and exchange that allocates products to everyone in the society. Communist society also involves the absence of private property, social classes, money, and the state. Communists often seek a voluntary state of self-governance, but disagree on the means to this end. This reflects a distinction between a more libertarian approach of communization, revolutionary This reflects a distinction between a more libertarian approach of communization, revolutionary spontaneity, and workers' self-management, and a more vanguardist or communist party-driven approach through the development of a constitutional socialist state followed by the withering away of the state. As one of the main ideologies on the political spectrum, communism is placed on the left wing alongside socialism, and communist parties and movements have been described as radical left or far left. In this stage, communism is an extreme form of socialism which aims to set up classes, moneyless and stateless society. The dialectical process continues until finally the state withers away and pure communism prevails. Communism is from each according to their ability to each according to their needs.
Okay, for the conclusion, Marx's theory of history provides a framework for analyzing human society and the law of its development. Marx here influenced by Charles Robert Darwin, natural selection, George Hegel, dialectical process, and Feuerbach, philosophical materialism in developing his theory of history. For Marx, history is a process through which the static relation of production pieces come into the eventual conflict with the dynamic force of the production antithesis. Conflict revolutionizes the system so that new relation of the production synthesis are new thesis permit the higher development of the force of production. The mechanism for overthrowing all societies is class struggle.